people were getting COVID and they were being given end-of-life drugs.
Fuck.
So you've got a respiratory infection, you've got morphine, and you've got midazolam. Now, you can work out, Russell, as a non-medic, that is a bad combination. All three of those are attacking the breathing, the oxygenation of the blood. And people were dying as a result of that. Now, what Wilson Sy did, he tracked the amount of midazolam that was going out, and he tracked the excess deaths. And he found out that a month after the midazolam was going out, the excess deaths were rising.
Hey, this is one I want to ask you, Doc. Is like, we know in practice euthanasia exists because any kind, compassionate healthcare professional, when it gets to a certain point, they up the opiates, organ failure, out. Euthanasia exists. So why do they need to change the law to make euthanasia more explicitly available? What do you think was going on there?
I don't think we should be changing the law. When we are looking after patients in a terminal care situation, we have many strategies and methods that we can use to relieve their suffering and to relieve their pain. Now, if someone's still got pain in a terminal care situation, typically what we can do, and this is done commonly, is we'll double the amount of opiates. If they've still got pain, we'll double them again. We'll put them on a syringe driver that might contain sort of midazolam. It might contain morphine, things to keep them calm, things to reduce the agitation. Now, if you keep doubling the dose of morphine, you don't need to be a professor of pharmacology to realize that sooner or later that's going to stop your breathing. But what I think the key thing is the motivation of the person giving it. This is what I believe. So if I give morphine and I'm doing that, or midazolam or whatever it is, and if I'm doing that and the prime purpose in my mind is to end the life of that individual, to me that's euthanasia, and I would consider myself a murderer if I deliberately tried to end someone's life. But if I'm giving someone larger and larger doses of morphine via a syringe driver to keep them calm and to treat their pain, and as a result of those large doses, you get exactly the same effect in the brain, that it switches off the respiratory center, then yes, that person will die. But to me, that's not euthanasia or murder because of the motivation that I used to give it. And we've seen disasters of this going wrong in recent times, Russell. Just looking at a paper last week by Wilson Sy, an Australian analyst, brilliant mathematician and statistician. And what he did was he looked at the amount of, there was this change in the law or change in the NICE guidelines, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. So it must be good.
Must be. Sounds nice. Sounds nice.
Yeah, they changed the guidelines in 2020 to give morphine and midazolam together. Now, midazolam is basically like strong diazepam or strong Valium. It's a benzodiazepine. And in large doses, that can depress respiration. Morphine, everyone knows that can depress respiration. Who signed off on that guideline that will give these two things together that depress the respiratory center? And then people I've talked to who work not so much in hospitals, but in care home facilities, care facilities, old people facilities, chronic sick facilities in the community. When their patients were getting COVID in 2020, very often what was happening, the nurses were getting the mobile phones out because the doctors weren't going. They weren't allowed to go in case they spread this dread lurgy all over the place. And the consultations were taking place on the phone. And as a result of that, doctors were often writing up end-of-life drugs. Now, end-of-life drugs are absolutely brilliant. When my dad was dying at home, the doctor came round and he wrote him up for a raft of end-of-life drugs. And then when the district nurse comes round to see my dad, if it was time, then she would give him those drugs. Now, thankfully, he didn't need them. He died, of natural causes. The Lord just took him at the appropriate time. But end-of-life drugs are brilliant. But what was happening is people were getting COVID and they were being given end-of-life drugs.
Fuck.
So you've got a respiratory infection, you've got morphine, and you've got midazolam. Now, you can work out, Russell, as a non-medic, that is a bad combination. All three of those are attacking the breathing, the oxygenation of the blood. And people were dying as a result of that. Now, what Wilson Sy did, he tracked the amount of midazolam that was going out, and he tracked the excess deaths. And he found out that a month after the midazolam was going out, the excess deaths were rising. But then when he put the excess deaths back a month to make them overlap, they were following each other like salt and pepper.
Wow.
That month delay. So the midazolam and morphine, he didn't look at the morphine, he just looked at the midazolam. The midazolam was going out. A month later, especially in 2020, there was excess deaths. And that gave the impression that COVID had a case fatality rate or an infection fatality rate of about 23%. Now, later it turned out to be about 0.18%. So the majority of these patients, in my view, in care facilities that died in 2020, if they'd just been supported and not giving morphine and midazolam, the vast majority of those would have made a full recovery. Now, I think there was a lot of national panic going on. I'm not blaming the doctors and the nurses. They were kind of following the procedure. And there were some patients that would have died who were given a more comfortable death as a result of the end-of-life drugs. But as well as that, as well as this, what is essentially euthanasia on a huge scale, that gave the impression that COVID was a particularly lethal infection. 23% infection. Now, if COVID's this lethal infection, then we need to lock down society. We need to mass vaccinate in a panic with untested vaccines. We need to start wearing masks all the time. All those COVID restrictions, you could argue that many of them came in as a result of this artificially inflated infection fatality rate, when in actual fact, the lockdowns and the vaccinations didn't work against midazolam overdose, which was a big part of the problem. So the fact that that is in the culture is really quite concerning.
Thanks for watching the video. Have a look at this one over here, or join us Monday, Wednesday and Friday on Rumble.